track the environment around you without shifting your focus away. This will come into play again a little later with some neat tricks I'll show you for flick shots. If that example didn't quite work for you, or you'd just like to experiment a little more, try looking at your screen while waving a hand in front of you. If you're looking at the screen, your hand will be a blur. But you can then shift your gaze and focus on the hand, completely changing your perspective and putting the screen out of focus. So long as it's not making you sick, you can try quickly shifting back and forth between the screen and your hand. Now that we've established the difference, you may be thinking that surely you're already focusing in-game. It's so obvious. Unfortunately, that's where autopilot and frankly sensory overload comes in. It is so incredibly easy to slip into autopilot when playing, and what I mean by that is just going through the motions. You may still be positioning and generally playing well, but you're playing off your accumulated knowledge and instinct. Your mind isn't really in it and fully engaged, and that's totally fair. It takes a lot of energy to be fully present, especially if you're playing for prolonged multi-hour sessions. This goes double for streamers. You may hear a common sentiment that streamers say they play much better off stream, and quite simply, they have far more energy and attention to direct toward the game when they're not managing chat, worrying about their performance or what they're saying. When I mention sensory overload, it's not quite that dramatic, and I don't want to diminish what it actually means. But modern games in particular have such an abundance of sounds, visuals, players talking, mechanical and strategic demands that it's no wonder that focus isn't happening automatically. Fortunately, while this makes focusing harder to do naturally, focusing itself is actually a great tool for ordering the chaos. With autopilot, the useful information gets lost in the noise, but with focus, we absorb what we need to and shut out the irrelevant bloat. So how do we apply this in-game? If you just jump right in, you may find that bizarrely you can't make it happen, which is odd because you literally just have to use your eyes to focus. It's easy enough to do looking at the fan or your hand, so what gives? The most common struggle I see people having with this is being overwhelmed during fights. My favorite fix is to play with game sound completely muted. No Spotify, Discord or anything, playing in silence. If your game of choice has a casual mode, deathmatch, that sort of thing, this would be the place to do it.
Sound is important, so you'll need to accept that you'll probably die a bunch of times to things you could have avoided. The point of this is to remove a huge number of auditory distractions so you can now focus on focusing. This should allow you to experience what true focus feels like during a fight in an FPS game. When you know what it feels like and what to expect, you can turn your sound back on and try again.
পুরুষ the scalp,
If you play aim trainers, a great method to practice this in a more controlled environment with fewer variables is by playing close to mid fast strafe style scenarios. Without focus, they will feel frustratingly erratic. Focus won't give you 100% accuracy, but the fast strafe suddenly feel much more manageable. In Kovacs, I recommend trying the robot variations that have a humanoid target, which provides more features to focus on and lets you get a feel for what absorbing visual cues is like. In-game, focusing lets you absorb information like a target's body position, angle, where their legs are facing, what objects or walls are around them, all of which let you know what their next moves are most likely to be.
Instead of reactively flicking your crosshair back and forth, you can, for example, acknowledge that they've just changed direction in their strafe and will move in one direction for the next few moments, netting you some predictable and easier shots. When you get good enough at it, you can determine the width of someone's AD strafe after the first left and right movement. The vast majority of players will AD strafe at the same cadence of button presses. It's really hard to desync them without some serious conscious effort. This lets you track them predictively after this point, rather than having to wait on your reaction time to tell you that they've changed direction. Knowing what focus feels like is only half the battle. We still need to remind ourselves to do it. These are my two favorite techniques for keeping it top of mind, and both of them use the same strategy of piggybacking this idea onto an already established behavior. First, anytime I have negative thoughts about my aim, like wondering why I missed some easy shots or maybe my sense doesn't feel right, I remind myself to focus. Second, every time I manually reload, I remind myself to focus.
Before long, these become habits. It's really difficult to summon the reminder to focus out of thin air,
especially when playing these chaotic modern shooters. By attaching this reminder to other behaviors,
you can automatically summon the thought in a non-intrusive way, keeping it top of mind without wasting energy or getting distracted. Generally speaking, the easiest way to go about this is to always focus on your target, not your crosshair or anything else. But if you're feeling a little adventurous, there are a few exceptions that can make your flick shots easier to land in certain situations. First is when you're holding an angle and need to react quickly. In this situation, I get caught out when scanning, I'm low health, and I know exactly where they are. Ideally, my crosshair would have been around the edge, but I didn't have time to move it, and by leaving it exactly where it landed, I have a moment to acknowledge where it is, and how far I'm likely going to need to aim. My eyes are focused on the edge here, because I don't know if he'll be able to peek his head up here, or whether he'll have to jump to get line of sight on me. With my eyes focused on this spot, the Pathfinder jumps up and I don't have time to move my eyes to the head. So instead, I keep my eyes fixed to that same spot and use my peripheral vision to follow his movement. Much like in the fan example where we tracked the other blades while still focusing on the original one. This lets me flick up to the head for a clutch headshot. To summarize that one, if you're holding an angle and need to react quickly, maintain your focus on one spot and track them with your peripheral vision instead. The second example is when you need to flick a long distance. This won't happen all too often, and usually it will happen when you're scanning your eyes around the environment and your gaze lands between your crosshair and the enemy. This clip was from a flick shot challenge I did, so I don't recommend aiming like this normally,
though it does provide a good example. With the large distance between my crosshair and the target, if I were to focus on the target, I lose track of where my crosshair is, making the shot unreliable as I don't really have a good sense of how far to flick. So instead, I focus on a spot in between the two, probably a little closer to the target as that's more important. While I'm focusing on this bit of nothingness in between, I can use my peripheral vision to determine my crosshair position and the position of my target, letting me perform a more well-informed and reliable flick shot. If you find yourself getting confused about when to focus on the target or when to choose a certain spot, just go for the target. The vast majority of the time it's the correct decision. As you get more comfortable, these variations will come to you naturally anyway without needing to summon up the decision between the two. For such a simple topic on the surface, there is a surprising amount of nuance, and the importance of doing this for improving your aiming performance cannot be understated. For that reason, please leave any questions or comments you may have down below and I'll do my best to answer them. If If you would like to see the rest of the Forbidden Flickshots challenge, you can check out the full video right here. Thanks so much for watching, be sure to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I'm Rid. I make content about aim improvement in FPS games, usually related to using Kovacs FPS Aim Trainer. If you're new to the channel, I'm kind of known for making overly detailed guides that go into great depth about all the aim topics out there. And most people get introduced to aim training by the Aimer 7 guide, and over the years, the aim community has significantly matured. Voltaic and Revosect, formerly Respectful Aim, are the two biggest aim communities out there, and each one has a set of benchmarks that you can use as a means to measure your relative aim skill. These benchmarks are broken out into 6 categories: static clicking, dynamic clicking, smooth tracking, reactive tracking, track target switching, and flick target switching. This used to only be 3 main categories of simply tracking, clicking, and switching. One thing I've been wanting to make for a while now is a complete series on how to correctly develop technique for each aim category. Christmas has canceled made a previous series that has helped a lot of people, myself included. He no longer seems to be making content, so I think it's time to do an updated version. This is going to be episode 1 in the series, and we're going to be covering static clicking. So static used to be called click timing a lot in the past. It's more accurate to simply call it clicking, and it's exactly what it describes. They're non-moving targets. In other words, they're static on the screen. In order for you to kill them, you got to click on them. What makes it different from dynamic or moving target scenarios like Passu or Bounce 180 is there's not really any reading skills involved, or your ability to track a target and then move your mouse in order to hit the position that the target's moving toward. It's more of a benchmark for your raw click speed, tempo, precision, and your ability to micro adjust after flicking to a target. 1-wall-4 TS is widely seen as the de facto standard scenario for benchmarking this skill, 4 targets being the golden number to avoid the impact of RNG for a run. TS, or small targets, are preferred by the aim community to build up and benchmark your overall static skill because it doesn't allow you to skate by on speed alone, where larger targets scenarios like 1-wall 6 TE would. It forces you to bring precision and accuracy to the table along with the flick speed and the tempo. So optimal settings in Kovacs for approaching static scenarios, you generally want to use a smaller plus for a crosshair. It's easy to see against a dot. You're going to be using your crosshair as a reference point in static way more than something like reactive tracking, where you'd mostly be watching the target. For colors and background, this is preference, but since the targets don't move, it's easier to see them against a flat, high contrast background. So gray walls and black targets is a common setup, just using pure color for the backgrounds. Because static dots is essentially 2D, there's no real advantage to ensure the background helps you perceive 3D space. For your field of view or FOV, you'll mostly be on 103 Overwatch. Sometimes it helps to bump it up a bit when you're doing wide wall sends like wide wall 3 targets. Sensitivity wise, this is largely going to be preference, but static benefits from a lower sensitivity than you might normally play, anywhere from 35 to 70 cm. This gives you the best of both worlds for speed and precision, where you can use more of your shoulder and arm to flick between targets and still use your fingertip and wrist for micro adjustments with high levels of precision. Mouse control will be king here for getting high scores. You can certainly play on a higher sensitivity to increase the difficulty, or if you just have insane mouse control, but it's unlikely you'll get on the leaderboards going any higher than about 35 cm, I would say. This is just my opinion, and there's probably going to be people in the community who disagree with me on this,
Like with anything in training, it just depends on what your goals are. Are you using Kovacs to just see those beautiful high scores on the leaderboards, or are you using it to supplement your FPS game? So for the technique, the main technique is best summarized by Bardos, who is arguably the best static aimer out there. There was a running joke in the aim community to take a Bard pill to improve at static as though there was just a quick fix, but he summarized it best in this tweet. Learn the technique the same way you would an instrument. Start slow at first to get the right habits in place and build up speed over time. Proper static technique consists of two main parts. Fast flick between the targets, and a slower micro adjustment to cover the remaining distance. That's it. It's dead simple. This tweet, in my opinion, is the most optimal way to train the static technique. If you take only one thing away from my whole video, this is it. Essentially, flick fast, micro adjust slow, and reset if you miss in the first 10 seconds, reset after 4 misses total. And I think it's extremely important to hold yourself accountable to reset the scenario when you miss per Bardos' guidance. Why? Because it creates a reward system in your brain for prioritizing accuracy. As Bardos says, the perfect run would have 100% accuracy, so it's critical to maintain accuracy as you increase your speed. As far as slow and smooth lines go, that's some of the worst advice I see about static dots, to slowly trace between targets. If you want to know why, pull up Microsoft Paint and try to draw a straight line between 2 points, slowly and then quickly. In all likelihood, the difference in mistakes you make along the way are so minor, and yet one method is vastly more quick than the other. So why go slow? As far as prioritizing speed or accuracy, a year or so ago, before Bardos entered the aim scene, the most prominent static aimer out there was Zeke. He had most of the top scores and generally suggested prioritizing speed in order to get better scores in static. This is the actual documented message in Reddit most people use as a basis for Zeke's preferences towards speed. A lot of people try to point out that Zeke and Bardos suggest training different ways and ask, should I work on speed or accuracy on static, as though they are opposing ideas? But in my mind, Zeke and Bardos do not have conflicting ideas on static, and both precision and speed are vital to your success. There's a user in the AIM community named DRoy Light who does a great job.
Do you know how many simultaneous users your website can handle? Most load testing tools require days of coding, script creation,
of explaining why the fast flick plus micro adjust method of learning works so well. It's because when you're doing fast flicks, you are inviting the opportunity to create errors and learn from them. Micro adjusting is a built-in method to correct the error created from the fast flick, and over time you get better at landing closer to the target and micro adjusting more quickly when you miss the flick. So by using the Bard Pill method, you'll improve in static in the most optimal way, even if your scores are lower at first, or if it's frustrating to reset so much. If you find yourself rarely needing to micro-adjust, you're likely practicing at a speed you're comfortable with. That's a good indication that you need to push yourself on speed to start introducing errors in your flicks and repeating the improvement process. That doesn't mean I recommend just aping or going all in on speed without any thought behind control. I would suggest pushing yourself about 20% on speed, get outside of your comfort zone, and when you're trying to improve your technique, so you don't get fat and happy where you're at. Think of it as focusing on speed to raise the ceiling on your current skill in static, and focusing on precision to hone that current skill. So is it better to under or over flick? This comes up a lot when discussing static. Zeke was the first to suggest under flicking being superior to an over flick because your momentum carries into an under flick, and the inverse is not true. Christmas is Cancelled even went so far to create a playlist specifically geared toward training for under flicking. That said, I think people focus way too much on it, beginner and intermediate players especially. If you're at a skill level where this thing starts to matter, you don't need someone like me explaining how to get better at static dots. So I would suggest not focusing on trying to do one or the other. And definitely don't try to over or under flick. Your goal should always be to land on the target when you flick. I see this suggested sometimes, and it makes me wonder what the hell people are thinking. So the common static scenario types you'll come across, one wall X targets is the most common, and that's things like one wall 4 targets, one wall 6 targets, one wall 2 targets, and tons of variations of those with smaller or larger bots. And then you've got the wide wall scenarios, again, wide wall X targets, which prioritize spacing the targets much further apart than the common one wall X targets, which forces you to use larger angles when you're flicking.
You've got Varied, which is becoming popular, and that is more like a time attack scenario. It starts you out with larger bots, and then over time in this scenario, you start getting smaller and smaller bots until they just totally disappear. Then you've got the Hipfire and Microflick type scenarios. Those have smaller targets that are in clusters, and they prioritize your wrist movements and your microflicking techniques. Pokeball is a really popular static type. You'll see it in all kinds of different variations, and it is a common recommendation to force you to work on your precision because it features bots that have a small amount of health that regenerates, so you can't just quickly move off of it after flicking to it. And then you get the pressure sends, which are a higher difficulty type sends. If you've never run them before, you're in for a treat. They can be very challenging, especially for newer players, but they're some of the best ways to push yourself on speed while staying precise. As far as target sizes go, you generally don't want to train on bigger than TS size.
As far as type sends, if you've never run them before, you're in for a treat. They can be very challenging, especially for newer players, but they're some of the best ways to push yourself on speed while staying precise. As far as target sizes go, you generally don't want to train on bigger than TS size. You'll see a lot of variants of scenarios like 30% smaller, small, extra small for every scenario type. Smaller targets obviously increase the difficulty and prioritize precision and mouse control. Larger targets will generally prioritize speed. As far as routines go, static routines, they benefit from being run in a one-by-one fashion, in my opinion. I recommend integrating the Bard Pill method when you're running the static routines, and it might take you 10 minutes to get through a single scenario. Most likely you'll get stuck, so I would suggest running these routines for about an hour, doing Bard Pill for about 30 minutes, then switching to just regular training to get you through the routine. You can run these routines in total random, and if you don't get through the whole routine, that's generally fine. After all, you're working on your static technique. For beginners, the Voltaic Static Easy 1x1 is a fantastic routine. It's a great compilation of all the different types of static scenarios you'll want to practice on. You could just play this routine if it doesn't get stale for you in a 1x1 method until GM, if you wanted, and still benefit from it. Getting into the intermediate and advanced, Voltaic has a static advanced 1x1, which is similar to the beginner, but then it starts to integrate the pressure scenarios, which, as I said before, they're more advanced and difficult for newer players, and they prioritize speed and accuracy. Eerie Cold 1x1. Eerie Cold, he's one of the top static aimers out there, and he's known for his excellent playlists across the spectrum. You'll see most of the same types of scenarios like what you would see in the Voltaic Static Advanced, and this is a common theme with static scenarios because they're fairly straightforward, and most of the best top scenarios have been figured out already. Trust Mix. Trust recently emerged as a top-tier static aimer. He's competing with Bardos on most of the static leaderboards. As of recording this video, he just won first place in a major AIM Lab tournament for $35,000, just to give you an idea of how good this guy is. And he built a routine around improving at 1 while 6 targets small specifically, but I think it's good for overall static improvement. You can run the routine as he built it, or you can just run it in a 1x1 fashion. Unans Flick Accuracy, this is one I recommend a lot. Unans has long been one of the best target switchers out there, and he's known for his insane mouse speed. As it happens, static target switch requires a lot of the same skills that static clicking requires, and if speed is your bottleneck for static, as it is with a lot of people, you can use his speed and flick accuracy routine. And remember, in target switch scenarios, you'll be running at a higher FOV. Anywhere between 115 and 125 Overwatch is preferred. Gord also put together a speed routine recently. She's probably unknown to most people watching this video, but she's been a top aimer for a while now and recently has been contributing more and more to the community with routines which are excellent. This routine that she put out is again geared more toward target switching, but it'll help you develop your overall mouse speed to get better scores in static. She suggests to run this in total randomize and at 115 FOV for box and 125 FOV for PAT TS scenarios. Compared to the Unans routines, this features bigger targets, which is good for training raw speed, but less effective for speed and precision combined. Which is more important to you will depend where your weaknesses lie, but in my opinion, chances are if you're not top 100 in popular static scenarios, you're probably not moving your hand fast enough. So other general notes, if you have difficulty holding yourself accountable to the Bard Pill method, some people have made Bard Pill versions of the popular static scenarios. You can just search for Bard Pill in Kovacs. Try them out.
Basically, they just reset after 4 misses for you automatically. Raspberry is also somebody who's recently come into prominence in the AIM community as one of the best map makers out there. He's built some excellent static scenarios with unique mechanics that are meant to help optimize improvement. One type is called VBR, which includes bots that vibrate slightly to enforce precision requirements. And the first time you're playing it, you might think you're hallucinating, but no, the bots are actually moving very slightly. It also adds a small amount of time to the run when you kill the bots and has a 4-bullet mag with a really long reload time. It's essentially using the Bard Pill method in a creative way. This combination of characteristics rewards speed and tempo with a softer penalty for accuracy along the way. That way, if you're having a really good tempo-based run, you can keep running with it, and there's still the guardrails in place when you're missing shots. The other scenario type that he recently built is his take on one wall 6 target small, called one wall 5 target small, which uses a square root accuracy system instead of a linear accuracy penalty. I actually asked him about why he thinks this is effective, and here's what he had to say. Obviously, the guy is passionate about aiming, so am I, so great minds think alike. The TLDR is square root accuracy is the superior bridge between reload and normal accuracy scenarios because it doesn't interrupt your rhythm and tempo while still having soft penalties in place for having poor accuracy. In his eyes, and I agree with this, you want to allow yourself the space to feel in the zone and ideally extend that as much as possible and avoid flow interruptions like coming up to the end of a timer or dealing with a reload. Now, if you watch pro aimers doing their runs, you'll notice they have a pretty solid and fast tempo they strive to hold themselves accountable to. Especially noticeable in wide wall scenarios, they'll try to hit a far target as quickly as a close one, so flick speed is crucial. Avoid going back to confirmed targets if you miss the first time. I see this a lot, especially with newer players, where they create a habit that every target has to die and go back if they miss. If you miss, move on. It's more important to keep your tempo going.
And don't overemphasize smoothness training as your one solution for all jitter or lack of clean lines. Smoothness routines are very specific to tracking and your ability to maintain your crosshair on your target as you're tracking the movement over a long period of time. I see it often suggested as a remedy in static if you don't have clean lines between targets, like if you swoop around or don't flick accuracy. This is going to just get better with time as you improve your static technique using the Bard Pill method. Don't think that smoothness applies to literally everything, because it doesn't. And try to avoid more than 2 distinct movements when you're moving from target to target. It's better to way over or under flick than to break up your flick into 3 or 4 movements. So that's really all I had for this video. I hope that all of this was helpful to you. Even though static dots are fairly straightforward in terms of how you should approach the technique, there's obviously a lot of nuance and ground to cover, hence the link of the video. I wanted this to be a comprehensive guide that stands the test of time. So again, this is going to be part 1 of 6 in the series, so look out for the next one. And until then, I wish you luck on all of your PBs.
You won't believe how I got here.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I am gonna try to do something a little bit different today. After I released my last video on static dots, I took a vacation for a week, and I tried to keep up on the comments as much as possible. I think I finally got through everything, but I figured I'd do something a little different this time and actually go through each of the comments that I got and kind of talk about my thought process behind justifying, the answers. One of the most common feedback I get is 2 different things. One is make more content. Yes, I know I try to make as much content as humanly possible. I do work full time. The other is people seem to like when I go into depth about things. This is something I struggle with internally, is how can I release content that's meaningful and succinct, but also go into detail. And, I have a kind of like a variety of an audience there. So this is going to be really me just talking through. I'm going to try to give you something to look at some points in the video at least. But if this isn't your bag and you want to see my normal content, then go ahead and just click off this video. It won't offend me in the slightest. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go top to bottom through all of these comments. Some of them I'm just going to skip over because I don't think it's relevant to the topic, which is static dots. I'm going to basically make this as an addendum to the static dots, and if this does well, if people like this, then I'll do this for each one of my videos. Basically, I'm trying to capture what people have questions about when they're watching my video. What did I miss
in the original topic, in the main topic. So if you're watching this start to finish, 1 through 6, there's going to be 12 videos total, the main video, and then my follow-up video, which is going to be kind of me talking through the comments. Okay, so the first one, do you think it's bad to change sensitivity often? A lot of gamers do this. Playing on 24 CM 360, do you think it's possible to have fast movements in the CM? Can I get over it with training? Okay, so one of the main things that I always talk about with sensitivity, and it's not just me, there's other really great aimers out there. I mentioned Hollow a lot. He's really good at kind of explaining the mechanics of aim, and he's way better of a player than I am. So feel free to follow him on Twitch. I think he makes YouTube content as well. But one of the things that he talks about and I talk about is sensitivity as a tool. And by that, I mean, you should get to a point where you can feel comfortable about making adjustments in your sensitivity without it having much impact to your game or your mental at all. Right. The reason for this is, and if you'll watch Hala, sometimes he'll just change his CM while he's doing a stream, like in Apex, just based on how he's feeling that day. Like, there's a lot of different factors that go into why you would want to use a certain sensitivity. The type of game, whether it's more tactical, whether there's more movement heavy, whether you need more precision, and even just, like humidity changes, and whether you had enough coffee that day, and I've changed sensitivities from a lower sensitivity to a higher sensitivity, and it's actually felt more smooth and more precise for me. If you're running at a lower sensitivity, by default, you're going to be more precise because it is going to allow you to use more of your arm and your shoulder and less of your wrist and your fingertip, which can be more shaky. All of that just to say, basically, think of your sensitivity as a tool. I answered this guy in the comments as well. You want to get to a point where you don't feel bad about changing your sensitivity multiple times in the same day. I'm not saying that you should just change your sensitivity and it should be your go-to anytime you're having trouble or you feel like you're not hitting your shots, so just change your sensitivity. What I'm saying is you should get to a point where you can feel comfortable doing so. And you want to know why you're changing sensitivity and what you expect the outcomes to be when you're doing it. And once you get to that point, then you can change your sensitivity as you need. How can I help with staying on target in games like Valorant or Apex? I sometimes notice that I move my crosshair too much when there's no need. I have aim trained for a while and I've done a lot of research because I love aim. I feel my wrists shaking while trying to be precise with it. These are the types of questions that are difficult for me to answer without seeing a VOD, right? But when I use a pistol, sometimes each shot I shoot, I flick for no reason, making me miss instead of going on target and just clicking. That's really something more that you would want to focus on in game, and thinking less about your aim and the impacts of aim while you're playing in game. So one of the main reasons why you would train aim is so that when you're in your game, you aren't thinking about why you're missing your shots or why you're losing fights because of your aim alone. Basically, like, the way I think of it is, if I'm training my aim on a regular basis, my aim is always the best it's going to be. And there's nothing I can really do about it, right? Like, you're at the top of your ability every single day within reason. I mean, obviously there's general variances from day to day just for anybody. And what that helps me do is it helps me kind of squirrel that away, right? So like, if I'm in a fight, I'm not thinking and I'm not over analyzing why I lost that fight because of my aim, because I'm doing the best I possibly can at any given moment because I spend time daily training my aim. And I think so it really comes down to feeling confident in your game, and then recognizing when you're doing something that is suboptimal or you're making poor decisions about how you're using the gun. For example, in this example where you're flicking for no reason, you can watch your VODs, you can pay attention while you're shooting with that gun. And
today we're checking out Walaxy, LinkedIn prospecting automation made easy. Walaxy automates your LinkedIn outreach so you make more valuable connections faster. Get started with their library of pre-made.
Force yourself to stay on target, for example. Like, think about that part of it. Don't think of it as like, oh no, my aim sucks right now, like I can't hit my shots. Think of it more as just like when you're training aim, like with static dots, like thinking about how you can correctly
move your mouse to not over flick or under flick on a target. It's the same concept. You're playing in game and you're seeing that you're doing something suboptimal and you're showing bad habits. So you think about that one component and then you fix it, right? It's small incremental fixes that you want to work on over time, and then they build into your experience, and then you don't have to think about them anymore. This other guy said, so the point of training clicking scenarios is to develop your technique, so why would you play with a lower sends with which mouse control and technique is less important? So that's a great question. I talked about that in the video, but essentially, going back to what I was saying about sensitivity as a tool, I think there's a lot of value in playing at a lower sensitivity other than trying to just chase high scores in static dots. It's like, yes, of course, you're going to have more precision, and it's kind of like cheesing the scenario to use a lower sensitivity, right? It also forces you to use
more parts of your arm than you would normally use, and different parts of your arm than you would normally use. This is something that I found when I was training static dots with a much lower sensitivity than I would normally train with, and then I would normally play with. So it's like, yeah, it is kind of cheating in some ways, and I wouldn't advocate just like constantly playing at a lower sensitivity just to get high scores, because that's not why you're doing it. I also wouldn't say that there's absolutely no value in playing at a lower sensitivity, even if it makes static dots easier. So this question is about Pokeball scenarios, and I wished I had gone into this a little bit more in my video. I just kind of ended up covering it with some text over the screen about why you hold left click button, why you hold it down the whole time you're doing Pokeball. So the Pokeball scenarios are meant to help with precision. They're meant to help with one of the common errors that I see people make with static dots and habits that they get into, and I might throw up some video to show an example of this, is kind of swooping around the target every single time that they move from target to target. And it's just these minor amount of waste that they're introducing, but it's enough over time. It really, really adds up and it lowers your scores, but it's a bad habit to get into, because it's that, those microseconds in a fight where you could potentially lose a fight just because you need to feel like you're confirming where your crosshair is landing. And what Pokeball scenarios help with, they help you with keeping lines straight from target to target, so you're not swooping around, you're just moving your crosshair onto that target. You hold your left click button for a couple reasons. One is for score optimization for sure. Another reason is when I start talking about target switching, I'll talk about this concept called spray transfer. And it's the idea where you're shooting at one target, and you are, let's say you got a gun with a 30 bullet mag, right? And then you use 15 of those bullets to shoot one person, and then you just flick over to the next target while still holding down your shoot button, mouse 1, basically, and then you start shooting that next target. That is what's called a spray transfer, and it's a great technique that you will want to learn to be able to optimize your damage uptime, essentially. And so Pokeball scenarios help with learning that, and I think it also helps to get into the habit of feeling comfortable with holding down your mouse button when you're moving between targets, because that's something that you commonly need to do, and it just kind of helps you with your mouse control overall. But ultimately, it's harder to get high scores on Pokeball scenarios without holding down mouse 1. And I think it's important just to kind of have that technique where you can feel like you can hold down mouse 1 and it doesn't really affect your aim that much. I've noticed that a big problem I have with aiming is once I'm near my target, I slow down and usually shoot just shy of them, resulting in me consistently grazing their necks. Ears. It's a problem with my wrist tensing up. So again, this is kind of like a BOD type thing. Ultimately, for me, this is something that you would want to be training with static dots, with your under and over flicking. This is something that you kind of get better at as you improve your technique. You always want to try to land on the target whenever you flick between targets. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a physical problem. That's certainly not the first place I would ever look whenever you're troubleshooting problems that you're having with your aim.
People often like to look at physical characteristics, things like their equipment or the way that they're using their wrists or what their pinkies or their fingers or their arm, when I would say most of the time that's not the first problem that you're having. People like to look to those things first because they are, in their head, they're things that they can more easily control, and it's something that they can focus their attention on, when in reality there's something much deeper happening that's harder to fix. So it's easier just to go after, the path of least resistance, basically. But so I definitely wouldn't think of this as your wrist tensing up unless you are absolutely noticing something over and over again where you're overly tense. I mean, you should always be trying to reduce your tension no matter what when you're aiming. But really, to me, this is a matter of training your static dots and training the technique correctly so that you are, over time, going to get better at landing on your targets when you're flicking from target to target. Should I use lower sensitivity for the switching routines as well? I assume you meant the switching scenarios. So, in switching scenarios, normally you want to use a higher sensitivity. I'll talk more about it in target switching once I get to that point of this video series, but target switching normally requires flicking between wide angles, and in order for you to be able to hit those big angles, if you're running at a really low sensitivity, you're going to find that you're going to struggle doing that. It's just the same reason why you would run at a higher FOV, so that you can actually see the targets on the screen so you can flick to them. So there's this question on mouse accel, but because it has nothing to do with static dots, I'm just going to skip over this one, but if you want to read it, you can on my YouTube channel. To video, I think there's some benefit to spending a little bit of time practicing straight lines slower. It makes your fast flicks more accurate with cleaner lines. So I agree with that. And the only reason why I didn't cover that in depth in my video is because I have seen so many Reddit posts in the FPS Aim Trainer subreddit where people say the way that you improve your static technique is by slowly tracing between targets. And that's wrong. That's not how you build the correct technique for approaching static dots. And Christmas is Canceled talked about this in his video too, and I'm not saying that because he's a way better aimer than I am, and I'm not saying that he was wrong in the way that he covered it, but I think people misinterpreted what he meant when he was covering that topic in the video. So, but absolutely, if you notice that you are having trouble with clean lines, then you should spend some time practicing straight lines slowly. I just think it's important that you develop that static technique from.
Welcome to Play White Label, where you can scale your agency with your own ad tool, powered by Play's advertising technology.
The very beginning. Like if you just installed Kovacs and you just picked up a mouse for the first time and you just started doing FPS games and you started to try to train your aim and you wanted to learn static dots, you wouldn't learn static dots by just slowly tracing between targets. You have to learn that fast flick. It's very important. Okay, so this was a pretty long one. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Disagree Bard Pill being the optimal method to train static. Not a fan of Bard Pill method for practicing static because all swings aren't equal and you don't necessarily want to flick to all of them and then micro correct. Some swings are harder than others. Just doing what feels natural to get to the target is the best way to train static. And, ends with saying, could possibly be the way to train for some people out there. It's certainly not for me. So, and by the way, I am totally open to dissenting opinions, and I don't claim to be the aim authority. There are way better aimers out there. There's way better technically skilled people. I simply try to take all of the information that I see out there in the AIM community and kind of distill it into something that people can get value out of. I do a lot of kind of training in my real job. I lead teams in my real job, so being effective at communication is kind of my thing. So what I find is that there's a lot of really highly skilled people out there that aren't good at communicating why they're good, and they might not even care. They just
move mouse where I look, is like one of the funny things that you always see people say. All of that said, I still really think that the Bard Pill method is the the most optimal way to train static that we know of right now. I won't go over why I think that is again, because I covered that in the video already. As far as all swings not being equal, absolutely, and that's one of the main reasons why people don't recommend using a metronome, because they feel like in your head, you get used to moving at a specific rhythm, and you force yourself to move slower when there's microflicks, even though the best thing to do would be to move faster if there's like a cluster of dots in that situation. But the technique, no matter what, is still always the same. And if you watch some great aimers out there, like Gord, Viscose, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, you'll see that they will move their hand, they'll move their cursor at the same speed no matter how far the flick is, right? And so even though it's close, even if a target is close, you're going to flick fast to it, and if a target's far, you're going to flick fast to it, and if you miss, you're going to micro adjust, right? Like, no matter what, that's still the concept that you're instilling, that's still the habit that you're trying to develop. And again, I value the idea of resetting when you are prioritizing working on your technique, because it forces you to keep and recall precision and accuracy while you're increasing your speed. So it's really it's an optimization technique. It's a built-in optimization technique. That's why it's so good. If you didn't use a Bard Pill method, it's not like you wouldn't get better at static dots over time. Of course you would. I'm just talking about if you have a certain amount of time, you have 100 amount of hours that you want to invest in to get better aim, how are you going to optimize that time, right? Like, so instead of taking 300 hours to get to the same point, you can do it in 100 hours. This is the best way to get there, because you get those feedback loops going, you make the mistakes, you create those errors, and then you improve, right? Like, you have to fail to get better. If you're not failing, you're not improving, right? Like, this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with in their head, especially Americans, not to bring cultural identity into it, but like the idea of failing is a negative thing for a lot of people. And it shouldn't be, because when you fail, you're improving. And that's what the Bard Pill method is doing. It's introducing those errors for you so that you can improve. Dun, dun, dun. Talking about a specific scenario and saying sends or sends. So that's one of the most unfortunate things that I hate about shortening scenario and sensitivity, is that they both sound the same. Sends and sends. It's gross. This was by far my favorite comment. It's so late, bro. Come on. That's literally it. Like, I don't know what that means. I guess that means I took too long to post a video, so I apologize for that. This was an interesting question. I don't find many videos about sniping and quickscoping training. I play COD. Do you have any thoughts on that topic? So, to me, quickscoping is really static dots. I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. When you quickscope, your FOV changes immediately. What that does is it creates a dimensional change in your viewpoint, and it creates a situation where you have to quickly react to a target being on screen and move your crosshair towards them and precisely land on them, ideally, and then shoot them. So it's very similar to a static dot. Like, let's say that you're doing a wide angle static dot scenario, or even a target switching type scenario in Kovacs, and your crosshair is like over in the lower left-hand corner, and then the next target appears way in the upper right-hand corner or something, or it's off screen for you, and then you have to quickly find it and then put your crosshair on it and then shoot it and hit the target. That is essentially what you're doing when you're quickscoping. You're ADSing, you're aiming down sights, for people who don't know what ADSing is. And when you're aiming down sights, most of the time your FOV is going to change, so your viewing angle is going to change, and that's going to cause your target to appear in a different position than once you were looking at them without aiming down sights, and then you have to quickly flick to them, make a change in your crosshair movement, and then land on the target. That's really all you're doing when you're quick scoping. It looks cool because you're basically, you're having to flick, you're having to be precise and accurate when you do flick, and in order to hit those shots. And it gives you, like, quick scoping in an FPS game kind of gives you the best of both worlds, where you can stay mobile, because most of the time when you're ADSing with a sniper, the games will reduce your movement speed. It also allows you to see more of happening on screen, essentially, so that because when you're looking down a scope, most of the time your viewing angle is like super limited, so it lets you hit those shots while still staying mobile and also seeing more on the screen. So I think that was all of the comments on this topic. On the static dots topic. So like I said, I'm gonna edit this. I'm gonna add maybe some footage for you to look at, so other than just my pretty face and my YouTube channel background. And if this is something that people like, then I'll just keep doing this. As always, I'm always looking for ways to improve the channel. I'm always trying to figure out ways to put more content out there, because I know people want it, but it does take a lot of time for me to edit videos, so this is just a way for me to experiment and see how it goes. As always, like, subscribe, tell your friends. Check me out on Twitter. I post there pretty frequently, usually once a day or so. Until then, I'm working on the dynamic or moving dots video next for the part 2 in the 6-part series. See you next time.